who are paying $300 a night in the hotel and probably being paid $1,000 a day for their services. You know, this is the situation. This is the governance challenge. Now, what this means is the LDCs must rely on outside resources in some sense. But what I would like to point out, and I think what you're looking for is practical suggestions to move forward. I think a reflection of this problem of not having resources for good governance is that statistical capacity has been neglected. And I would stress, as a very practical message to come out from this symposium or from this session, is to enhance statistical capacity at the national level. And I think this will require outside aid. There is the Paris 21, but I think this needs to be reinforced. And this is in every area: trade capacity, trade statistics, you know, all the statistics. Just if one can reinforce that, that will help. Now, if we turn to the global level, what we see is that there are LDC-specific measures, as Anna set out. Now, they evaluated them during the Brussels Programme of Action, and their conclusion was that they had limited results. Our conclusion was that these had symbolic rather than practical developmental effects. But I think the point which I'd just like to put on the table, I don't really have a good solution to this, is that some of these measures had very strong monitoring mechanisms, but even though they had strong monitoring mechanisms, they were not implemented. So one of the measures was, for example, to untie aid. The OECD has been monitoring that every single year, producing a report every single year. The result is that aid has been untied de facto, de jure, but de facto it hasn't been untied, because there are all kinds of inertias which stop it. TRIPS 66.2, which is asking developed countries to provide incentives to their enterprises to transfer technology to LDCs, is also monitored. But what you see is that it hasn't been implemented. Now, I think the question is, why have they not been implemented when they're being monitored so closely? And I think the only answer you can come to is that this is not a question of information or institutions, but a question of interests, perceived interests. So if there are financial costs or opportunity costs to the developed countries in implementing this, then they're reluctant. Now, the LDC-specific measures are one thing, but these measures work within a broader global economic regime. And I think this is the other blockage in terms of implementation, because there is incoherence between the LDC-specific measures and the broader global regime. And I'll just give two examples. One is the Enhanced Integrated Framework, which is asking LDCs to mainstream trade in their development strategies. That's great, they're trying to do it. But the macroeconomic framework, which includes the export and import targets, is basically located in the Ministry of Finance and is negotiated with the IMF. Now, if the countries don't own their trade forecasts, and I mean by owned throughout the government, not just in the Ministry of Finance, there is no way they can mainstream trade into their development strategies. Now, another example is the negotiations going on now. We have an LDC, we have LDC duty-free, quota-free market access, but also we have the AGOA regime. And it's the kind of conflict between these which is leading to tensions. Now, what are my solutions to this? I still think mechanism-specific monitoring is worth following up. I think we should continue this kind of mechanism-specific monitoring. I also think that it would be worth some kind of recipient country level monitoring of what is happening. At the global level, the Office of the High Representative also produces a report, but this only goes to ECOSOC, and it just disappears into the UN system. This annual report should have a wider diffusion. It just goes into the UN system, and it's constrained by the UN rules. I wanted to say something on MDGs at the end, because people sometimes see that as a positive example. I think my main message there, my main positive message, is that the MDGs have had contradictory effects in terms of what they do, and so monitoring, if you become very target specific, you can have contradictory effects. But the very good example from the MDGs is something called the Millennium Campaign. And this is not very well known, but the Millennium Campaign has been very powerful in building political support. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles. That was definitely very, very interesting, and Charles, as usual, has tried to push the frontier further and concentrating on the implementation challenges. Although I'm very much tempted to pick on a couple of issues which Charles had mentioned, starting from this very, very interesting empirical comparison between to illustrate or reveal the governance deficit between 20 cents and $20 per capita per day expenditures, or his comparison between a high official, how much he gets paid vis-a-vis the per night fees which the consultant gets and whom he essentially manages supposedly under his ownership. So it's revealing. And I won't go into the very, very important technical points he has mentioned, because maybe at the end I will try to summarize some of those, and since we are running behind schedule, I will be pushing everybody to graduate faster. Now my pleasure is to invite Professor Mehmet Arda. Mehmet Arda is also a great veteran in this area. Many of you know him, not only because he comes from the host country, but because of his great contribution in the commodity division of UNCTAD. I have had the great pleasure of knowing him for a long time. And and in the preparatory process for this UNLDC IV, he has made significant intellectual contribution. And so we are very, very happy that he could find time to join us today over here. Mehmet, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb. It's a big pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and welcome. And I welcome everybody to Istanbul. It's a very nice city. I came from Geneva. I settled here after retiring. So it's a fantastic place, and I hope you'll have some time to enjoy that. Now, I'll talk about implementation. I'm not in the issue. I'm not working on the least developed countries as Charles and Anna are doing. So I'll be a little more general, I think. Now, the issue is why monitor and why implement. I'm not saying about why monitor. We have to monitor in order to see whether things are working effectively, and monitoring, and in order to correct things which are not working effectively, and also to identify things which may be inconsistent, which may need to be rectified along the way. So that is something which is very important, because it's a process, it's something which has been decided at a point, may have to be reviewed, may have to be, as I said, defined along the way. So that, I think, is an important reason to monitor. And of course, another reason is to learn lessons for other programs of action, not LDCs, but also for general, there are lots of programs of action which often turn out to be like the previous and the current LDC program of action, which I find very wide and very too detailed, perhaps in certain areas, not detailed in other areas. So it's difficult to hold on to certain things. So if you can find what works, I guess for the next one you can do a little bit better in identifying how a program of action should be. Now, there are two ways of looking at monitoring. One is to look at results. What has happened, let's say every 3 years, every 5 years, or at the end of the period, and see whether things have changed. But that I don't think, well, that's very important, but that I don't think is the monitoring of a program of action, because things may have changed which have nothing to do with the program of action. For instance, you look at the export earnings of LDCs, which have improved. Great. Is that a result of the Brussels program of action? No. It's thanks to China's demand for copper and for petroleum. So it's a false self-congratulation if you say, well, LDC's share in world trade is very low, but if you look at overall, as some people do, some people have done, and some people have said in the negotiations, look, what they're talking about is they've been very successful, because look at the amount of exports that have gone up. But what has gone up is, of course, something different. The fortuitous events that outside may have taken place. So it's very important to find the causality and attribution when you do monitoring. Causality and attribution, I think, are very important. Then, in order to find causality and attribution, you have to identify actions. It is very difficult. It has been very difficult in the Brussels plan of action. I think it is a little bit better, but it is still very difficult in the current plan of action, the program of action, to identify actions. I think it's something which we have to keep in mind. But there are lots of exhortations. Okay, but at first, when I was thinking about the program, these exhortations, these big things, which are objectives without any actions attached to them in some ways, seem to be rather empty. But then I realized that provides a paradigm for the program of action. So these things, private-public cooperation, etc. There are some big words that you find from here in the program of action, which in the end, as I said, give the framework. They may not be monitorable, but I think they're not useless. Perhaps one can look at the results in the end, but I think they provide the approach of the program of action, which I think is important. Then there are actions which are already accepted, like the MDGs. A lot of the program of action is MDGs. MDGs have their own monitoring process. MDGs have their own dynamics. Therefore, I think they are somewhat different from the other types of LDC-specific actions that one has to really be careful about. Now, the special support measures that Anna mentioned, of course, are the key to this. But if you look at them, all those special support measures are basically governmental measures, institutional measures that were mentioned. Whereas I totally agree with Charles that there are new partnerships that have to be monitored as well. What is the